Hello everyone, welcome to another Jagged Alliance free DevStream live from the Haemimont Games studio here from Sofia, Bulgaria. We got a great show for you tonight. We have an interview with Ivan-Assen, who is our CTO, and we also are going to continue afterwards with the second edition of Cursed Builds from Pavel, from our level design team that you already know from a previous edition. But before we jump into the entire show, let's wrap up on what happened last week. So we had Kalina here because we had the launch of Jagged Alliance free on consoles, and specifically on PlayStation and Xbox, and she showed us a little bit more on the console version and how you can get around the first, I think we got to Ernie. So it was an interesting interesting perspective from her first impressions, because she is like a producer here in Haemimont Games, of course, but she was mainly attached to the other project that we had. So it was kind of her first impression of the playthrough of a controller for Jagged Alliance free. And of course, we also have a hotfix 132, which launched this week, that fixed an issue that was known for some save games being screwed up. So that is probably going to save a lot of people's playthroughs and, you know, make things better for them. What else? Next week we're gonna talk with one of our the level design lead, Reni, or Fate, as she's known in the office, and she's gonna tell us a little bit more about actually editing some of the maps that we already have and how they built the maps that they built for Jagged Alliance free, and show you a little bit behind the scenes ahead of the mod editor that is gonna handle the map editing and the campaign editing. So stay tuned for that next week. And without further ado, let's jump into our main guest today, who is Ivan-Assen. And like I said, he is the lead programmer on Jagged Alliance free. He's also the CTO, and you've been around for a while.
Way too many years. Yeah, let's not go into such big numbers, but me and you just before the stream did some counting, and I think I've shipped I've took part in shipping something like 16 games for Haemimont Games at this point, on PC and different consoles. I was here almost since the beginning of the gaming studio, almost but not quite. And for this project I also took on the part of a lead programmer, of a software lead for Jagged Alliance. Which will turn out to be quite the challenge, as we'll get into a bit later.
I wasn't. Let's not go into how exactly it was hard, but yeah. Before we jump into Jag, let's review a little bit more about. I don't know. How did you join the company? How did everything of this happen? Like all these 16 titles.
Well, like many kids these days, and many kids 2 or 3 decades ago, I wanted to make games ever since I started playing games on the first computers I touched, and I started by trying some little printouts from magazines, because back then this was way before the internet.
That was the way to go.
Yeah, and I distinctly remember telling my then boss in my previous job, before here I've worked for a few years as a translator.
Ooh.
And in a magazine, in technical magazine. And I remember telling my boss that I want to make video games at one point. And this is the first time I articulated it, because this is like something that's always been in the background of my mind. I've played around, especially with graphics. Then I got sidetracked into proper engineering, and I got a degree in telecom engineering.
All right.
And forgot about games and games programming for a bit. But at one point, fate pulled me back in the video game track, because I was interested in digital signal processing. And I did a home project, and I was taking a course in DSP at that moment. And I asked the professor who was doing the course something about my project. And he explained how I'm entirely on an entirely wrong track, and politely asked me to join the company he was working for, which was doing something interesting with digital signal processing at that point. But another department of the same company in the corridor next door was doing the first Bulgarian video game.
You're like,
so yeah, I spent a few more months on DSP, and then I jumped to the game department, and I've worked with them ever since.
That turned out to be the precursor of Haemimont Games, right?
Yeah, it was a company from which Haemimont Games split off at one point. We separated the game stuff into its own company a bit later.
Yeah, let's focus on actually making the games.
Yeah.
But that's a big story that maybe we can go into detail at some point. Maybe have Gabi here, and yeah. All right, so let's jump into something that we always notice when there's a launch of a game. You know, there's this new title going out, and we always see someone on forums or discussions going into, hey, what is this? What engine is this built on? Everyone's like, oh, this is Unity. Of course, it's Unity. Like, so let's handle that topic. Is it Unity?
No, it's not Unity, and it's not Unreal either. It's our in-house engine, which we've been developing since something like 2005. Essentially, all our 3D titles have been built on this code base, which was started around 2005 and has been evolved ever since without a clean break at any point. We've replaced large parts of it. We replace parts of it and rewrite them and optimize them and add new stuff. But it's any two consecutive games in our portfolio share a lot of common code.
Yeah, that gives a lot of benefits. But what's it built on?
It's built the old-fashioned way with C++ and the fundamental layer, and with a lot of Lua on top of it. We use C++ for stuff that is first platform-specific, and second needs more performance. And we use Lua for anything closer to the player, to gameplay, stuff that needs to change. And stuff always needs to change because we're always iterating on the games and experimenting and doing stuff over and over. So there's a lot of common C++ code which handles, for example, the rendering, and there's a lot of common Lua code. The division between C++ and Lua is not the division between common code and game code, but it's between stuff that is game-specific and stuff that is common for all our games. And usually, because Lua is very convenient and flexible and has its own advantages, but it's way, way slower than C++. So during the development of each particular title, we usually take the most problematic in terms of performance parts and rewrite them back in C++.
All right. So yeah, making the most slowest, you can say, just
Yeah.
accelerating it a bit.
Yeah, and stuff that is more stable and won't likely be changed a lot, because stuff in C++ is harder to change, but much more performant.
This is something that we didn't discuss like a question beforehand, but when you chose, like when the studio chose Lua, it wasn't like modding was not really a thing back then, was it?
Well, not really. In fact, our first games, we had a series of 2D strategy games, RTS games, the Celtic King series. And even back then we had the idea of a dynamic scripting language in which we will develop the game logic. And back then we had our own language. And at some point, I think it was after our first 3D city builder, 3D game. So technically, after the first game with this engine, the Sol engine as we call it, we did a beauty contest. We lined up several languages for potential incorporation, and we ended up with Lua. And it's quite a popular choice in the game industry. A lot of games are using it to different degrees. We are really very, very heavy users of Lua, as you can see in the published reference source code repositories of our games. We are shipping most of the game logic for Jagged Alliance, and for one of our previous games on GitHub. You can search for them.
Yeah, which is awesome actually. But what are the advantages? Like we've talked about. I keep learning new stuff that's like from the programming side that I had no idea about. But what are the advantages of actually having an in-house, proprietary engine? Because it's not like you have all of the libraries that you can like use ready codes or approaches. But on the other side,
well, I'd say the greatest advantage is control. We have full control of what we can do and what we can't do, and when we investigate problems, usually the problem is with us, somewhere, as we joke here, on the same floor with us. And we're not waiting someone to open an email or
like
open
you.
a support ticket 6 time zones from us.
yeah.
Another advantage is that our code base is very much focused. We don't attempt to make an engine to handle all use cases for all games.
Yep.
And this allows us to cut corners and do some stuff which is would be harder to do with a universal engine. And for example, for many years we had most of our previous games were strategy games, city builders, stuff that requires large vistas, distant cameras, and thousands of individual units.
Yeah.
We've had save games from users from Surviving Mars with on the order of 25,000 units in them. And this is something which, if you dump on a universal engine, it will have its problems, and you have to start doing custom solutions to go around that. So you're losing the benefit of taking something ready.
But that's also characteristic for the studio that we actually don't want to make the same game over the years, like make only city builders or make only RTSs.
No, I think a lot of people would be very bored if we had to do the same game over and over again for 20, 30 years. We've done some classical RTSs, we've done city builders, we've done an action RPG, which was it's dear to our hearts very much. We had one turn-based strategy game before Jagged Alliance. It was called Omerta, much smaller and much shorter in development time. We even had an action-adventure traditional console game many years ago.
Yeah, and we graduated, let's say, to turn-based with Jagged Alliance.
Yeah. Jagged Alliance is really 3 games in one. It has a real-time game in it, it has a turn-based game with it, which is not exactly turn-based, and it has this entire satellite layer on top. Another advantage about having a proprietary engine is, of course, something which is not frequently discussed, but the off-the-shelf engines are actually quite expensive. And if you look at the indie license which is seat-based for something like Unity, you decide this is something you will pay once or twice, and it doesn't matter how much then the game brings in. But once the game starts bringing in the serious bucks, it becomes a significant part of the budget. So they're by no terms free. Anyone can make a developer account and start fiddling around with Unreal, for example. But there's a reasonable but not non-trivial royalty, I think, for Unreal. It's
I don't remember the exact pricing, but it was really dependent on specific situations, the size of the studio, the size of the production value and stuff.
For a studio of our size and for games of our budget, it will definitely be very much visible on the spreadsheet.
Yeah. I like the way you phrased it. But yeah. All right.
And there is something that it is very much overlooked until you get your hands dirty with development, but the popular engines, stuff which is very easy to demonstrate and very sexy in demo videos. Like animation blending systems or physics or fantastic rendering techniques, but for which our artists are forever jealous and envious and asking me when we will have this. But a lot of the grunt work in making a game is in systems which are not readily provided, stuff you rarely even think about unless it starts breaking. For example, save games. How save games works is a very much non-trivial problem, especially for a game which has playthroughs of tens of hours like Jagged Alliance, which means
hundreds maybe,
which means that the player will probably patch the game several times during the same playthrough, and you have to keep save game compatibility with his old save, which is a very much non-trivial issue, and it's not something you can get off the shelf.
Yeah.
And another thing with which Pavel here is very much familiar is the localization system.
Headache.
We've always shipped our games in more than a dozen languages. And this is something which comes with a lot of tooling on our site, which is ready and just moves from project to project with small enhancements. And it's not something we have
I've heard about the huge challenge of Victor Vrand, because Jagged Alliance has neat strings in a way. They're not composed of each other. For instance, what was like the best example was you get a drop of a weapon like the Doom Slayer's heavy weapon of something, which sounds like very simple in English, but when you switch it to other languages where the adjective is on the backside, where you have genders in the actual language, is like much more complex.
English is the worst language to make games in because it has virtually no grammar. And everything works. However you slap some words together, they kind of look like English, but when you start try to move this into a language with adjectives. But don't get me started. I'm a bit of a linguistics nerd, so it's a bit dangerous.
Well, if there's some tangent that you want to go on, it's totally fine. So,
and of course, something that is very important for Jagged Alliance and for our last 3 games is modding, which is something we only really started doing with Surviving Mars, and we'll be putting more and more effort in it because this is something that is becoming very important for the industry. And the structure of our engine, where you can do really, really a lot of stuff only by touching WoW without compiling stuff, without loading DLLs. This means we can free the hands of our modders very much. And we're right now working on additional tools, something we haven't yet released in any of our games, but which will come in a later update for Jagged Alliance, which will hopefully allow players to edit existing maps, add new sectors to existing campaigns, or even make an entirely new campaign without Grand Chien and the Adjani River Valley.
This is a hellhole. Yes. Actually, I was surprised by the size of some mods, like even for some older games, because we were talking the other day and someone told me like, hey, you want to look at this mod? And he's like, no, that's 5 gigs a mod. Wait, what? So
this is 1/3 of a game, and if everything goes well, I expect at one point to see mods which are larger than the original game.
Well, probably Jag is one such title, because if people actually want to make an entire new campaign with a new map, with new sectors, new assets, and so on, it basically just could throw out all of the existing art and just start over. So
they'll essentially use the executable and the 5 megabytes of WoW code we have, or something like that, and replace everything else. And this direction is of the industry moving towards more modding, and this interest of player into modding is interesting and difficult technologically, because it moves in the opposite direction of what we were doing a decade ago, which was to very tightly pack and optimize and compact and compress everything to load as quickly as possible and to take up the minimal amount of memory. But
Times
if you
changed.
do this, you lose the flexibility, and turns out now this flexibility and modding is more important than loading times and memory budgets. And this is something which I think everyone who is trying to do modding in their games struggles with. Us and the big guys with the off-the-shelf engines and the other studios with their proprietary engines.
Well, actually, I'm looking at some of the questions. Better hope with actual development. Well, yes, it's much. I can say it from personal experience because I can just go in and, for instance, if it's something as simple as the credits, just no headache attached. Just edit, the things there or some variables or something like that. So if I can understand it, then it's fine. Then it's really helpful. And yeah, it's a headache to support a lot of the mods, but we've been trying to include all of the modders into direct contact with us, especially some of the people who have gone above and beyond and making some awesome content for the mods. This is another service announcement that's public service announcement that we are aware that some people don't use Discord and they still want access to some of the early unstable builds. They have their own mods and stuff. So we're looking into how exactly we want to structure it because a new channel means new places that we need to always be on top of in terms of information. So yeah, that is additional resources that we need to figure out before we start and commit to a lot of other places.
This is something else we're learning, not just the technical aspect of modding, how the game is built, but also how we interact with the community and how we release builds and how we take feedback. The process is as important as the technology, if not more important.
Yeah. What was it? Active mods, like in each bug report, first thing you look at is active mods.
Yes.
You see
We already have bug reports from people with upwards of 100 mods, and people who play other popular games tell me these are rookie numbers.
Oh, go on. But yes. I know that something else is very characteristic of our engine. The build process is much faster, right?
Well, this is something that certainly impresses other developers we talk with, but it's maybe not so interesting and understandable for the general public. Basically, when you have done all the changes for an update, from that you run something called the build process, which produces the tens of thousands of files which the game consists of, and ends with either a disk image for the consoles or upload a build to Steam. And this is something which, if you don't pay attention to, runs easily into hours and in the worst cases even in days. So people can't run many builds. Like, for example, you can only do one build a day, which makes you very careful and afraid to touch stuff. And we spent a lot of effort on doing this, in optimizing these build times and only rebuilding what's really necessary, so we can literally push out a build to Steam in minutes. And this is something publishers love to see, because publishers don't like to see games patched a lot, because this means they are very buggy and we are not very careful when patching them, but they certainly appreciate the ability to do it rapidly.
Yeah. I remember, because I didn't have any context on this, but we were probably on dinner or something with Brad, and he mentioned that this is, back in the days, this used to cost upwards of 6 hours or something like that. And when I weighed the two, I was like, okay, this is actually very good.
We've had games where this reached something like an hour, and this means that for the last days or weeks of the projects, you're afraid to touch anything, because you don't want to wait that hour again.
Plus, someone might really fix that one thing that was supposed to go in,
and you start
5 minutes later.
So now our release speed is limited by how fast we can find the issues and fix them, and by how fast our QA can validate the fixes, because we never ship stuff that isn't tested, at least to see if the so-called regression testing, to see that the issues we claim are fixed are really fixed.
Yeah.
Plus, we run through a standard set of tests. But this is what takes the most time, and not the build, not moving files from folder A to folder B.
Oh, it's awesome to be able to focus on the real things, though. Yeah, and how about the Jagged Alliance free experience? Did you know what you were getting into when we started?
Absolutely not. If you see our release cadence over the years, you see some games take much longer than others, and this is when we try a new genre for us. And we had an action RPG, which took a lot of time and a lot of learning, and we did an action game, which was the same. And now with Jagged Alliance, we've had some of these, and it's really a very big game. It's in some sense, in terms of game mechanics and in terms of technology, it's 3 games in one, because it has the real-time aspect when you're outside of combat and everything moves at the same time, and then you have the turn-based aspect, which is on the surface it looks turn-based, but it's not turn-based in the sense of chess that one player moves and everything else is static, and then the other player moves and everything is static. For example, we try to overlap enemy movements when we believe they won't come in conflict, so the player waits for the enemy turn much less. And also there's things like the Overwatch, which lead to interruptions, and so it's not really a turn-based game. It's another real-time game with different rules of how time flows. And then on top of that, you have the satellite view, which comes with its own timeline and chronology and rules of what is paused and when time flows. And this turned out to be a bit of a challenge. Plus, we knew the main challenge for the project was having a good ancestor to good sequel to Jagged Alliance 2. But this actually didn't mean that we have a template to copy from, because stuff had to be changed, and even stuff that didn't have to be changed, it had to be carefully examined in the original game and re-implemented. And all of this was combined with 1 or 1.5 years of COVID and scrambling to work from home and setting up all that infrastructure, which didn't help. So I think the original release date is still a secret and shall forever remain one, but we took
earlier.
we slipped a bit, so to speak, and this explains the console versions, which we are probably one of the last big games to support the previous generation of consoles, which of course led to its own set of problems, because there were a lot of performance issues associated.
Because they need to.
They're like something like 10 years old at this point, the CPUs. So
it was fun. But yeah, it is multiple games in one. We actually, when we were announcing the game in Gamescom 2 years ago, maybe, for the media, that's what we said, that those are the 3 things that people really love about Jagged Alliance, that it's a tactical game plus a strategic game plus it has really good characters. And all 3 were like challenging, because like you said, the first 2 are 2 different games. The third one is 40 actual characters with characteristic art, like unique art, and all of the NPCs. So it was fun times.
Yeah, and also it was by far the largest game we've done in terms of content. So everything like number of individual objects, number of files, everything increased a lot, and we had to update a lot of our systems and tools and pipelines to handle this. And for the quests and conversations, We had to develop a set of tools for that to walk the thin line between programming and game design to let game designers do as much as the scripting work.
This needs
as
to be
possible.
done like this. No, it can't be done.
Yeah, and this is something we didn't get right on the first try, and then content was already created, and when you update the tools, you have to redo the old content. And all of this periodically needed to be updated to handle the even more content that arrived. This is also certainly the game with the most recorded voice lines we've ever done.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And probably one of the largest translations we've done, if not the largest.
I can't give a word count, but it's a little bit less than 30K strings, so
yeah,
it's a chunk. But I always remember like a sense approach to someone coming and said, "Hey, we need to do this." Like someone wrote to him, "We need to do this and we need to make this happen." And he's like, "What you're thinking is not what you think you're thinking. Here's how it's gonna work." And he gives a different solution of the same problem. It's like, that don't go in the direction that you think you're going. Step back. So yeah. How about multiplayer?
Oh, multiplayer was also a chunk of work. We've done a lot of multiplayer games in the past, but
starting with RTSs, like
this was different in several aspects. For example, this was our first game which allowed for drop-in, drop-out multiplayer. So there's no separate multiplayer session and single-player sessions. Anyone can just invite someone to join their single-player game. They play as much as they have time together, and then they can continue the single-player game. Which required some different solutions. And multiplayer is something you have to think about all the time. And anytime you don't, you find out a bit about it a few months later, usually. And unfortunately, we keep running into that again and again. Somebody in a GDC talk said that
what's
multiplayer is netcode, because netcode was something that gamers had caught onto, and we're discussing the netcode of this game and the netcode of that game like they're discussing engines. So netcode is something that creates in the players the illusion that they're playing the same game.
Yeah.
And while they're typically not. And whenever that illusion falls apart and the games diverge, you get the dreaded desync messages, which we keep fighting. But allowing you to resync is another thing that we did for the first time. And hopefully that saved some
from the Steam comments that I read, like people are annoyed with desyncs, but resync really helps out.
It helps if it lets you walk around the bug. For example, you have a problem on a specific place on the map, and then this desyncs, and then you resync and try to do something else, then you can continue playing. But if there's a fundamental bug, for example, in the weapon you have picked and it desyncs every time you shoot, resync won't help because you have the same gun and try it again. And this is where you should submit a bug, and we'll get to it eventually.
I love not a review, but a comment that I read somewhere. Oh, but this is just a simple isometric game. It should be really easy, really fast. It shouldn't have any, performance issues.
Yeah, isometric is one of those words people love to throw around, but Jagged Alliance is not isometric in any sense of the word. It has, for example, you can see the horizon. In a typical isometric game, the camera is looking down on top of the playing field. And always at the same angle, but you can control the angle, and with the action camera, you can see the entire level. So you get all the problems of normal third-person games on top of the normal isometric view. Plus, the maps are really, really detailed. I think Faith will show you next week when you do the stream with her.
I promised her that the first thing that we're gonna do when we get on stream is just press on one of the not larger, but the more active maps, just press F3, to open the editor, and then it's like an explosion of Santa's balls explode.
It's the level designers have really outdone themselves in this game, and there's a lot of small, tiny details with assets, and the game could have worked 90% as well, but it wouldn't be the same game.
No, it wouldn't look the same.
It creates this richness of detail that makes you feel you're looking at a real place. And you can find, for example, stacks of beer bottles and tins.
I remember the beer bottles.
All over the maps in weird places, and there are created some places that tell you a story, like somebody stopped here for a smoke or something like that. So purely technically, in terms of objects on the screen and triangles on the screen, this is very much a high-end game, and this is why your GPU fans sometimes spin up, because it really pushes the numbers, even though it's the sequel to a isometric game from 20 years ago. From the point of view of your GPU, it certainly isn't.
Oh, were you aware that some players actually use the photo mode that we implemented like 1 or 2 patches ago to check line of sight?
Well, I can understand that. It makes sense. Maybe we should include the debugging tools for the line of sight in the photo mode. It will make for some very nice, a forensic analysis shots. This is how the bullet went.
I remember we probably put it in one of the dev diaries, a shot of the line of sight and line of fire. I don't know if it only shows one of the two. I think only one of the two. But yeah, it was like your unit and then like a porcupine. With potential shots everywhere. So that was fun.
It's very easy when you're trying to make a realistic simulation to add all the stuff that you believe is realistic in terms of line of sight checks. Like, for example, you check to multiple points of the body, or you check what would happen if you step out of a corner, or you can only interact with doors which you can directly see. And it's very easy to add this line of sight check and then another line of sight check. And if you have a fairly powerful PC, this just kind of works. But when you try to run it on a 10-year-old machine, suddenly all those line of sight checks are way too much. And this is another challenge we had. This seemingly simple turn-based game actually does a lot of collision checks. Game logic had to be, and this is something which we unfortunately didn't have time to do in time for the PC release, and thankfully PCs are much more powerful than when we started, so we had time to optimize some of this for the console release, and you'll find the game performs much better now at 1.3, which is what we shipped on consoles.
Cornor is opening a whole can of worms with destructible environment. Let's not get too much into that, but I remember propagating destructible objects. Like, if you have something that's leaning on the table and then you destroy the table, that thing should also, be destroyed. That led to a whole chain of...
This is a hard problem. This is a problem that structural engineers solve in their CAD tools to simulate how real buildings would fall, and we couldn't afford to do anything as complicated as a real solution. So we drew a line, and there's some stuff which has to be done manually by level designers. But it's a compromise that allowed us to have plausible results without hopefully too much bricks floating in the air after an explosion, and still with level designers keeping some amount of sanity and not having to annotate each brick and link their dependencies to other bricks in the level.
Yeah, but like in general, how we handle it, like in terms of the buildings specifically, because different objects can just get destroyed. There are slabs, and the slabs have also destroyed or punctured, not punctured, but if you have a slab of concrete is a bad example, but bricks, for instance, and you launch a rocket launcher through it, it also has different states of the slab that is just like the top or the side, so it looks, destroyed, but only that slab, not everything around the mansion, because we had that very interesting a meeting in the conference room where we just had the destructible environment work, and Nelson just placed what was it, propane tanks or something like that in the game all around the mansion, and just shot at them and everything blew up. And I have this video where he's just laughing maniacally, which is amazing.
And when the artist has done the basic solid block of bricks for a piece of wall without destruction and has fit into the polygon budget, and then he has to create the destroyed version, and it needs to have all these rough edges and pieces of rebar sticking out, and suddenly the polygon budget explodes. So you can bring the game to its knees with enough destruction. We have developer tools that create a lot of explosions, and I'm sure modders have found them and tried them, and
at some point someone actually I saw on a forum that said, why aren't trees destructible? And I was like, are you insane? Do you know how much detail is in trees? You want to add different states to them? No, thank you. It's like, come on.
I saw two interesting questions in the chat. One of them was if we have few places with multiple floors because of performance issues. Not really.
I don't know how that would save it.
This is based on game design considerations, whatever the designers wanted to do. If you make a skyscraper, you can build a 10-floor skyscraper in the editor, but it wouldn't be very comfortable to play with the controls we give, and when you have important objects on different floors and you destroy them, they start fall, or we have to make undestroyable portions to prop them up. It quickly gets hairy. So I believe this is why the designers have limited themselves and have limited the level design.
Well, everyone has good ideas until they start putting in the software.
Yeah.
They're like, okay, let's limit it to here.
But the other question is how much destructible environment and some other tactics games. Yeah, I think this was one of the very few first bullet points in the requirements. We need to have destructible environments.
That's opened up a lot in terms of gameplay that you couldn't do before. For instance, you have a really powerful weapon or an RPG, and it just stands there behind of a shack. It doesn't work.
I'm sure modders will experiment with both buildings with more floors and also with less destructible environments, because you can mark some stuff not to be destructible. If you want to make a concrete bunker, in fact, we do have concrete bunkers.
We do have
They're not destructible.
What was we used to have this but when we launched the game with the ultra settings.
Oh yes, this is we definitely made a mistake there. We tend to think of the game's settings like the game is really meant to be played on high, and this is where all the effects are shown. Nothing is hidden, and the effects are their optimal performance level, where you get good bang for your buck for your GPU buck, where you spend the GPU performance you spend leads to the best results. And we had to leave some ultra settings in because it's traditional, and because if somebody is playing hopefully in 10 years time and has a much more powerful PC, they can attempt. But
it's their right to burn their machine.
Yeah, it's really something that provides very little improvement over high at very bad cost, very high cost. Like, for example, for the reflections, we have this smart system which tries to determine which pixels to try to calculate reflections for. I'm carefully avoiding saying ray tracing because we don't support proper hardware ray tracing. And it's something very clever that improved performance a lot. And then on Ultra, we just brute force calculate reflections for everything. And unsurprisingly, it leads to approximately the same results with much lower frame rate.
So it's a small improvement for a higher.
Yeah, but
much higher
it seems a lot of people feel that they have bought a good enough video card and they deserve to run everything on Ultra, and they weren't happy and they brought out but it's just an isometric game card.
Yes.
We will do some more careful allocation of options between high and ultra in our future games, and for now I hope future players will simply have better video cards. And we also added a warning message for the first time ever when you choose ultra, so hopefully that alleviates some of the problems.
Expectation setting is key.
Yeah,
but I'm a simple man myself. When I go into a new game, first thing I go is turn shadows to low. I'm happy.
Well, shadows in this game and in many other games are really something very problematic, and for the typical Jagged Alliance 3 scene, you render twice as many objects in the shadows as you do in the main scene. Because, to render shadows, you render the scene at least once more, maybe multiple times more from the point of view of the sun or of the point light of the light source you have. And that typically catches much more objects than what you actually see on the screen. Because you might be walking, imagine a third-person game, you might be walking in the shadow of a big tree, which is not on the screen, you don't see it, but you need to see its shadow. You need to be in the shadow. So when you render the shadows, this tree has to be included. So typically the shadow scenes are quite heavier than the main scenes in some regards.
Oh yeah. There was a question, what potential do you see in mods? Well, I actually got into this in a previous DevStream, but the position of the studio is that we really want to support modding, and we think that it's very important for the games that we release, because one person might want, this specific thing to go in this direction and then another direction, and this allows us creative freedom to make the decision that we want, and lets modders tweak and find the best balance for them. First of all, a lot of people want to add content to the games that we make, which is fine by us. If you want that other model, that a specific system that you desired, we want to give that power to the player. And also, a disclaimer here, we don't want to be shackled by too much hand-holding. Like, we want to be able to give the tools that we use, because the modding tools are toned-down versions, as far as I know, of some of the tools that we use, so that you guys can take the game and build on top of it for as you will. So we're not that much into documentation and stuff like that, but we want to have clean tools that you can understand and actually form a community, and some other people can actually help out with this. So yeah.
Another question from the chat, very specific. What were the main challenges in switching between real-time and turn-based mode? Units have to wait until they finish animations. Yes, the turn-based mode requires units to be on specific positions. For example, we don't have animations where a unit is hanging off a ladder and shooting, or falling down if they are dead. So we can't enter turn-based mode while there's anyone on a ladder. So we have to wait for units to finish animations to get them into a valid position from which they can participate in turn-based combat. And also we have to get rid of civilians.
Yes.
They try to get in the way, they cower in fear in place. Generally, we don't want to turn this into a civilian shooting simulator. Nope. And this getting the game into a valid state for combat is not trivial.
Also, the real time does not adhere to the grid that combat adheres to. So basically, when you start combat and you shoot some of the bad guys and your enemies and they need to enter combat, all of the units must, align to a grid, because what happens when, that enemy unit is just somewhere between four of the voxels, like that needs to get resolved in the start combat scene.
The grid is an interesting thing. Maybe you have done, or maybe you can do an episode with one of the game designers about
Maybe.
Grids, our previous turn-based game Omerta tried to not work on a grid, and it had many problems. And we knew that for Jagged Alliance we have to stick to the square grid from the first two games. And in the beginning we even tried to make the entire environment exactly conform, be built out of grid tile-sized blocks.
Yeah.
But this didn't look good. So we had to build something that analyzes the objects, however the level designers have placed them, and determine which grid squares have cover from what side. And
we actually talked about this in a previous DevStream, that we could have gone just, very strict to the grid and just laid it out like that. But
we tried, but it didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't look good either. So, yeah, that was...
Modding AI behaviors, yes, this should be doable. Equivalence between range numbers and real life meters, I'll have to leave that to...
I even don't know what that means.
This will have to wait for some of our combat designers.
Fenor?
No.
Designers.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Game designers.
Okay. Yeah, people really like Momchi, so he's probably gonna come back.
We couldn't go with absolutely realistic numbers, so forgive us for somebody mentioned shotguns having a 5 meter range.
Oh,
not exactly 5 meters, but
yeah, I get right what you mean.
There was one of these days news item about a confirmed sniper kill from 3.8 kilometers, and if we made the game on a 3.8 kilometers, you would walk. It would turn into a walking simulator. Forgive me for using that a bit controversial term. So we had to size the maps so that combats are intense.
Yeah.
And don't. This is something we should really leave to the game designers.
Game designers, yeah. But it's much more fun in this way. But yeah, favorite games.
Favorite games. Well, I'm a bit of a filthy casual, as our producer Brad used to say, and I've spent the most time with Skyrim back when it was fresh and new, and I also, after the release, I took some time off to play Starfield, which comes somewhat close to Skyrim in space, and also you can play it as a form of something like a Mass Effect. And I thought that back when I was playing Skyrim on a Xbox 360 many years ago, I thought that this is a fantastic game and we could never ever think of making something like this. While now, as I was playing Starfield, I thought that, this has a lot of content, even more content than we handle now, but this is something well within our reach. And this is something I'd love to do, something content heavy, narrative with even higher end graphics, because I'm a graphics programmer at heart.
who does a lot of other programming as well. But yeah, I remember Skyrim the first time, after you left the starting area and just saw the first time the mountains in the distance with the, it's not mist, it's a fog, it's an actual fog, and I was like, holy, I don't have a really expensive computer. This thing is awesome. It still sticks in my mind that if I launch it today, I think I'm going to be impressed. Maybe I won't be.
No, you will be disappointed. Don't keep the memory.
Okay.
Keep the memory, but there are places in Skyrim I remember to this date, and I was very impressed.
Let me give you nerd out chance. What is something in the industry that you're interested in terms of developments? You're gonna go more into tech, not into the gameplay, but
nerd alert. It's now the time to take a coffee if you are waiting for the cursed builds update. There's something interesting going with graphics hardware. Some call it the Wheel of Reincarnation, which is a cycle where periodically graphics hardware gets more universal and then gets more specialized, and then again more universal, because if you do very specialized hardware, you can make it usually very fast. But then if you make it more universal, you can do interesting stuff with it. And for example, the first 3D video accelerators, if anyone is old, if you're old enough to remember Jagged Alliance 2, you may be old enough to remember 3DFX Voodoo, but those were cards that were only capable of drawing textured triangles on the screen and nothing else. And then little by little that they got more universal, and they started running little programs for each pixel on screen, which is what we call shaders. And at some point the GPUs became very universal and capable of running any kind of code, almost any kind of code. And this is why the crypto people and then the machine learning people bought all of the GPUs, and there's nothing for us gamers. And some say that at this point, for example, AMD's GCN architecture was very similar to the traditional x86 architecture we have in terms of universality. It's just a multi-core CPU with somewhat different patterns of execution. And then 5 or 7 years ago, something like that, we got another optimized, another swing back in the specialized direction, and those were the ray tracing units that appeared. And they could do something very well, but only to trace rays and invoke other rays under very specific conditions. And what is now on the horizon and is promising is an attempt to open up that black box and create some add new stuff to GPUs, which is again universal and can be used to do different stuff, not just trace rays. And this is called, I believe, work graphs, something like this. This is essentially the ability of GPUs to issue new commands to themselves. Everything, not everything, but a lot of interesting stuff that happens around graphics is around the idea that the GPU is feeding itself commands without waiting for the much slower CPU.
Any idea what that will imply for future games?
This will create this will allow us to do dynamic games with many more objects.
Ooh, okay.
Like, for example, we now comfortably run on the order of tens of thousands of objects in a level or on the screen, and this will allow us to push one, maybe two orders of magnitude more. So you can do a city full of people walking around without resorting to tricks like hiding the units when they get a bit further, or not drawing the insides of buildings, which is a good idea anyway. But this decision whether to hide a unit because it's behind a building, this should be left to the GPU, because any round trips between the CPU and the GPU are very expensive.
Yeah, I love talking to Assen. I quoted him a line from one of the movies that I really like, from Margin Call, like, "Speak to me as if you would to a small child or a golden retriever." He does not disappoint. So yeah, I really enjoy the explanation. You want to wrap up?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's
because I'm getting a little bit nervous, because this is the first time that I had the dynamic duo of Pavel from the level design team, the other Pavel, and Dinko, who we're gonna meet in a second. So the only thing that I told him is don't get in the news tomorrow with the stream tonight. So let's see how that goes and how they fare. So yes. We'll see you again in just a short bit until we make the workstation here for the Curse Builds episode 2. Stick around.